Welcome everyone. Thanks for taking time out on this Saturday afternoon to join us at GradGurus with our third event. This is the third event of our Breaking Into series. So for those who are familiar with us, we did our first event, which was Breaking Into the Big Four, breaking into the PwC, EY, Deloitte, and KPMG, which was followed by our second event, which was talking about breaking into investment banking. And today we have management consultancy. And the aim of these is to kind of do a various different fields, various different events, just to kind of give you a flavor of what these industries are like, what these jobs are like, but also support and tips and advice on how to be successful in your application. So just to kind of move on to the agenda. To begin with, we have our mission. So what GradGurus is about, what our purpose is. We're going to talk about the team. So you can just see me now, but there's a lot more people behind the scenes doing a lot more hard work. And this is an interesting one, talking about the consultancy market structure. So I can imagine inside this call, we have people who are third years, some we are first years and second years, and even some college kids as well doing A levels. And at that stage, you probably don't know what you want to go into, what career paths, which is fine. We'll just give you an oversight of how the market is structured and what kind of careers are available to you. And then I'll hand over to our two guest speakers. Firstly, we have Leila Hafar, who's a consultant at Accenture, and Muhammad Amanji, who is currently a manager at EY. So who are GradGurus and what is our mission? I'm not going to read off the slides, but I think the best way to explain this is if I were to kind of reflect upon my time at university and probably even before that at college, it was one of my family friends within the community who was at the time a graduate at EY. I think he was in his second year doing audit. And I remember having a conversation with him and he told me about who the Big Four are, what auditing, what accountancy is all about. And at that time, I had no idea. And he kind of guided me and transitioned me towards going for, applying to some school leaver programs. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but instead of going to university, the Big Four, and I think some other challenger firms as well, they offer a school leaver program. So instead of going to university, you go straight in that firm, you train up there, you get a qualification at the end of it. Unfortunately, I applied, but wasn't successful in any of them. I don't even think I got past the psychometric testing. So I eventually made the decision, like a lot of you, go to university instead. And I went to Manchester University. During my second year, I applied for a number of different internships and placement. And I was lucky enough to get a placement at PwC in the assurance division. And that was, if I were to reflect back, one of the biggest factors in me being successful in that placement scheme was because I was able to kind of have those conversations with my friend from my local community. Kind of, he was there to guide me throughout each step of the process. He gave me a lot of support with interviews, and also he had a couple of friends who were involved in the assessment center process. So I was able to kind of get some inside information there. So what I'm trying to say here is GradGurus is looking to take that on a much coordinated, larger scale. And we want to be here for each part of the application process, whether that's psychometric testing, the interviews, or the assessment center. And also for a lot of younger students as well, who are not entirely sure where exactly they want to take their career or just want to have a general career chat advice. We're also there available as well to kind of talk about what skills you have and where you think that's best suited, or to give you an insight into various different industries and professions. So that in a nutshell is what GradGurus is about, what we're trying to aim and what we're trying to accomplish. In terms of moving on to the team, so we have a lot of handsome fellows over here. Going from the top left, working my way to the right, we have the founder, Ali Ahmed, who currently works at JP Morgan in internal audit. He was previously at EY as well, and is currently doing his qualification. Moving on, we have Ahmed Estawani, who is at KPMG assistant manager, specifically working in financial services. Moving on, we have Hudayfa Jama, who's kind of someone a bit different in the sense that he's gone from an engineering background and a bit more of an entrepreneur. He's also the founder of Xdot, as you can see there. Moving on to myself, I'm currently a senior at EY in the audit practice. Actually, this probably needs updating when it comes to our next event, because I'll be leaving soon, taking the leap into industry, as they call it. But I qualified in AC, I think back in December 2019. Moving on, we have Takia Hussain, and he's an entrepreneur. You could tell he's an entrepreneur because he has a turtleneck, whereas everyone else is wearing a suit on. But yeah, he's the creative minds behind our team. And then last but not least, we have Muhammad Hafar, who is a strategy analysis. He's also had previous experience working at Accenture as well. So that's a brief overview of the team. Hopefully a lot of these names will be familiar to you guys because now we've been existing for a number of months now. hopefully we've been helping a couple of you guys on this call with your application process or any interview, CV reviews or any mentorship in general. So hopefully a lot of these names look familiar. You've had some conversation with myself or other people as part of this team. Moving on, as mentioned, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of what the consultancy market is like. I appreciate some of you might be new to this type of thing, but you want to be aware of what exactly it is structured. I'm looking at this, consultancy is quite a difficult market to kind of define, in the sense that I'll be looking at this from the candidate's perspective, i.e. you guys applying to these various different firms. And this is how I've kind of split you up. So I split you up in kind of 3-4 different tiers. And the first one, we have the 3 big strategy houses, McKinsey, Bain, and Boston Consultancy Group. So these are kind of your major strategy houses, probably the ones that you most commonly heard of. If I were to move on to tier 2, we have firms. These are like there's a lot of firms in this, but I've just narrowed it down to a handful, just to kind of, don't want to give you an exhaustive list. Oliver Wyman and Roland Berger, these are some of the firms within the tier 2, so large companies, but just not to the scale of the top 3. And then moving on to tier 3, we have PwC, Deloitte, KPMG, and EY, commonly referred to as the Big 4. I mentioned I used to work at PwC and currently work at EY. And Mohammed obviously works at EY as well. These firms they also have the predominantly accountancy and tax firms, but they also have a large arm in consultancy as well. So that's something just to kind of note out as well. These firms offer a lot of different service streams. So make sure to check out the websites or even have a conversation with us if you're unsure what exactly service line you want to get into. And then the last one I've got here is boutique firms. This is a bit of a vague term, but these are kind of like smaller niche firms, in the sense that these tend to focus on specific industries, specific markets as well. So for example, if you wanted a healthcare consultant, you go to one that's specifically for healthcare, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of a brief overview of what the consultancy markets is. So hopefully, if you are ready to kind of make your application, you'll have a long list of companies in front of you, and you'll be able to see, okay, my top aim is to get into the big 3 strategy houses. And in order to get like interview prep or assessment center prep, I might start off with the boutique firm just to kind of hone in my skills. So that's just to give you an overview of what's out there and what's available. But I think that's enough for me. And I'm going to now hand over to our first speaker, which is Layla Hafar. And just an overview of Layla, she was also a University of Manchester graduate. She did the course IBFE, which is International Business, Finance and Economics. I'm interested to know if there's actually any fellow Manchester University students on this call as well. But during her second year, she did an intern at Citibank, before moving on to a graduate scheme at Accenture. If I were to ask Layla to unmute herself and hand it over to you.
Sure, thank you, Ibarra, for that introduction. I'm just going to share my screen, so just give me a second. So my slide deck isn't as cool as the GradGurus one, but it's fine. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about my journey into consulting, specifically management consulting, and why I did it, why I got involved, and what was the journey like for me. So I'm going to start off with the typical, since I was a baby, I always knew I wanted to do management consulting. This is a lie, obviously. Nobody knows when they're a baby or when they're in primary school or any of that, what they wanted to do. It's one of those, things that you put in your personal statement, expecting to get brownie points. Actually, my journey into consulting was pretty much like everything kind of in my life. So my brother's on this call, Mohammed Hafar, and I basically follow in his footsteps with everything. He went to, a certain high school. I went to the girl version. He went to Manchester Uni. I went to Manchester Uni. He went into consulting, and I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. Let me go into consulting too. So that's pretty much how I really started out. It wasn't anything crazy. And, that tends to happen with a lot of careers. Like if your dad's a doctor, your mom's a doctor, you'd be like, oh, medicine sounds pretty cool. Although I've been told they actually put you off going into medicine if you do have parents who are doctors. But what was my journey like? So this is a really poor graph, but I just tried to draw something. My journey had a lot of ups and downs, and it's going to be the same for you guys. It's the truth. It hurts, but that's something you have to get used to. And you'll see in this presentation, you'll see when I go through my journey, that there were moments where I wouldn't say rock bottom, because it's not that deep in the grand scheme of things, but I was pretty low. And then there were times where obviously, you know, I got my role at Accenture, which I guess was the peak. And I actually left Accenture only recently, probably like a couple of months ago. And even then, you know, I did the whole job hunt application thing again and again. It's up and down, and that's something everyone just has to really get used to and come to terms with, I would probably say. So we'll start my first year at university. I always say that it's really, really good to get involved with societies at university. You need to stand out at the end of the day. Like, everyone goes to university, everyone's in the same boat, everyone gets a 2-1 or a first, whatever it is. But that doesn't really make you stand out too much. What does make you stand out is what you've done and what experiences you've had. So in terms of societies, I got involved with a couple. I'm not really going to go into what they were, but they built up my skill set, and they gave me something to talk about when I had interviews. The second thing I did was spring weeks. So if you're in your first year at university, which I think a couple of you are, this is something you need to do. Probably, I don't know if it's too late, we're in February now, but usually they happen around Easter. Obviously with the current climate, I have no idea how it's going to be structured. Probably will be virtual. But anyway, with spring weeks, what they do is like a couple of days in Easter, a couple of big companies do these spring weeks, and it's a bit of an insight into whatever it is you want to go into, whether it be management consulting, or at the time I was also looking at investment banking. Again, saw my brother doing it, so I was like, oh, okay, seems interesting. Let me find out what it's about. And by the way, I don't know if anybody else, you know, agrees who is a consultant, but I personally never really understood what consulting was until I actually started doing it. And I feel like, as much as, you know, you do these spring weeks and insight days and everything, okay, you know, you kind of know what management consulting or investment banking or whatever it is, you know, you've done is about, but not too much until you actually do the work. So yeah, I actually got a spring week at City. If you're a girl on this call, which sounds like I'm singling everyone else out, but girls, there's a lot of programs out there for you, specifically for girls. That was my edge. I got into a lot of programs just because I was a girl. Even if you're like BAME, they do programs now. Not saying, you know, everyone else you've got a disadvantage, but they specifically target those kinds of groups, because, you know, they're the kinds of groups that might not usually go into something like consulting or investment banking or whatever it is. So yeah, that was my spring week. And then when it comes to like during the year, I also did like insight days. So they happened probably, I don't know, they could have happened earlier in the year, I don't really remember, or after my spring week. I'm not too sure when it did happen, but either way, I attended insight days. So these would have been like a day in London at like EY's office. So I went to one of those, and then through that, I was introduced to an internship that was happening at EY, and it was specifically for first year students. Now, this was probably my like lowest moment. It was like high and then low. So what happened was, it was an internship for pro bono consulting, which is basically consulting for good. So, you know, you work with like social enterprises, companies who are basically doing good stuff. So like, for example, like a company in Uganda or a social enterprise in Uganda who are building like wells or something like that. So EY had a specific stream at the time that dealt with consulting for those kinds of social enterprises. Anyway, there was an internship available for a first year student. Went to the interview, the assessment center, absolutely smashed it out. It sounds really cocky, but I actually did a really good job. I think mostly I really wanted it and I was really passionate, so I was just basically was myself. I was against like Oxford, Cambridge, you know, you name it, people with like amazing grades, loads of societies, whatever it was, probably much better than me. But they didn't seem as passionate about it. They kind of just wanted it for, you know, to have it on their CV, which isn't a bad thing, but I actually really wanted it. Anyways, I succeeded. I got the internship. I was the only person in the whole of the UK to get it. And then you're probably thinking, where's your low? So it was my first year and I basically didn't take my studies seriously. So I ended up failing a module and having to resit that module in the summer at the same time as the internship, which by the way was in Johannesburg in South Africa, all expenses paid. Would have gone for like 10 weeks. had the best summer of my life, but I didn't get it because I had to email them, do the walk of shame, and be like, yeah, I just failed one of my exams. And this is a key tip: don't ever underestimate your, your degree. Don't neglect it. It's pretty difficult, but you have to balance your degree, your societies, and your career at the same time. So if you're still in uni, don't think, what, it's fine, like I don't need to study hard enough. No, you really need to get that 2-1 or that first, because you're not going to really get through if you don't do that. So yeah, that was my lowest point probably. And then we move on to second year uni. So again, second year uni, still carried on getting involved, attending networking events, university career events. These events were just, getting to know people, basically making yourself stand out, getting contacts, etc., etc. The word networking is like my most hated word, because it's one of those things that you just get shoved down your throat when you're doing career related stuff, and it becomes quite fake. I really didn't like that. So just try and be yourself when you go to networking events. Don't ask questions for the sake of asking questions. Then again, a lot of these companies do ask for you to be fake in a way and ask these questions just for the sake of it. So I don't know, play the game is probably my advice when it comes to that. After attending loads of networking events and career events, I ended up getting an internship at Citi. So Citi Group is mostly, it's like the finance side of things rather than, management consulting. But I was kind of exploring things at the time. I'd applied for an internship with Citi for investment banking, and I actually managed to get that through my spring week. So that was the only reason I was basically fast tracked. And what happened was that I didn't get the internship for investment banking, but I got an internship for sales and trading. So sales and trading is if you don't know what sales and trading is, it's basically like stocks. I was about to say it's basically Wolf of Wall Street, but I can't really say that. It's not very legit, but it's basically, stock exchange, etc., etc. So as you can tell, I really enjoyed it. That's why I'm explaining to you in detail. That was complete sarcasm. I actually hated that summer. I'm not saying sales and trading is bad. It just wasn't for me. That summer, Brexit happened, Trump happened, the Turkish coup happened, and I think that was it. But it was the craziest summer on the stock market, which was good. But yeah, it was just insane. So that's why I compared it to Wolf of Wall Street, because that kind of aggressive behavior, I saw a lot of that. When times are tough, you see a lot of things, but it was still pretty good. Now you're probably all thinking, okay, like I've heard enough about all these experiences. Where does management consulting come along? This is where third year of university comes along. This is when it gets serious. I basically was like, finance isn't for me. Let me do management consulting and focus on that. So I focused in my final year on my exams for a good reason, because first year university gave me that slap in the face where I was like, okay, can't be doing this again. I need to pass these exams. Got 2-1, so that was great. But whilst I was, studying, and I didn't know I would obviously get a 2-1 by the end of that year. But anyway, whilst I was studying, I submitted loads of applications. I think at the time it was only about 12 or 13, and I had a spreadsheet. Most people you speak to will probably tell you about this infamous spreadsheet that they have, which basically has every single company that they can think of, and they start tracking it. So I just before this call, I went on to find one of my spreadsheets, and like it was like mostly red, which basically means that I got rejected for most of them. And then I had a couple of yellows like floating about in the distance, like, okay, these are options, you might get this. Anyways, as I was doing my applications, I realized, you know what, I don't think I'm going to get anything. And you know what, I don't think I really want to go into consulting right now. I want to do something exciting. So I decided to go to China and teach English for a year. I loved it. I thought it was like the best experience of my life. And I would actually recommend, I wouldn't recommend going to teach English in China because this isn't one of those promos, but I would recommend, if there's something you want to do it straight out of uni. It's just the best time, in my opinion, to do something. And also you can apply for things during your final year. And if you get them, they're really flexible usually on deferring for the year after. So if that's something you want to do it, because you're not going to get an opportunity again to do that kind of thing. Anyways, as I said, final year uni didn't go so well from the applications front. So I just stopped applying and packed my bags and went to China. Now, whilst I was in China, the spreadsheet came out again. This time it was 28 companies. So 28 companies that varied. I had management consulting firms, I had the NHS, I had Teach First, loads of varying companies, just because I knew I wanted to do management consulting, but at the same time I was still exploring my options. So whilst I was in China, obviously I had the difficulty of not being in the UK. And I hadn't really thought of that, before I packed my bags and went. But luckily for me, in February, China takes the whole month off. And so I came back to the UK in February. And whilst I was out there, I was still doing these applications. I was doing, video interviews, whatever I could do, and contacting these companies saying, listen, I'm in China, I can't leave. Is there any chance we can do a video interview? They were like, no, it won't work in format and all this kind of stuff. But obviously now we can see with COVID, everyone has managed to do video interviews. But anyways, past that point, I only had a couple of companies that did agree to do video interviews with me. And also, it was these three plus IBM that offered me an interview in February. I was just really lucky that the Chinese holiday hit the same time as the interviews for most of these companies and like the assessment centers. So I interviewed for, I didn't put IBM on here, which was another place I interviewed for, but it's because it wasn't really one of the main contenders by the end of it. But I interviewed for NHS, Teach First, Accenture, and IBM. I didn't really want to work for IBM at the time, but also I did the interview and I hadn't even researched IBM just because I wasn't too passionate about it. So there's nothing against IBM. It's just I didn't really know much about them. So I went to the interview. I actually did really well at the interview, except the one thing. I didn't even research what IBM did. And that is, big mistake. Don't do that. Don't go to an interview and not know what IBM does, or NHS or Accenture or KPMG or PwC, whatever it is. Know what they do. Like, even if they don't ask you the question, which usually they don't. So I was a bit shook when I went to IBM and they were like, so tell us, what does IBM do? And I was like, no clue. I just thought they were going to ask me like competency questions. So things about, teamwork or leadership, whatever it is. So that didn't go too well. Anyways, I got NHS Teach First, and then Accenture came along. Actually, I only progressed to the second stage of NHS before I decided not to continue. Teach First I got, and then Accenture came along. So with Accenture, I was first introduced to Accenture in my second year. I went to an event, and I basically just didn't really like the feel of them. Sounds really strange, but I just was like, I don't know, I'm not sure. But my brother worked at Accenture. So I thought, yeah, you know what, let me apply and see how it goes. The assessment center, so Accenture's process is you have, and it's changed now, so I don't know if there's any point me even saying this, but I had a video interview whilst I was in China. It was recorded, and you just answer competency-based questions. No psychometric test, which is probably the only reason I got in. I'm not really that great at psychometric tests. You need to practice them basically to get through. And then the assessment center itself was just case study. That's very typical management consulting, interview, and I don't remember the third thing. So this assessment center was terrible. It just was really, really bad. And I remember one of the things that's really important in the assessment center, and I know my time is coming to the end, so I'm going to try and wrap up. But anyway, one of the things that's really important with the assessment center, Accenture specifically, was being honest. So my case study was terrible, and I went to the interview and she said, how was your case study? Is there anything you could have done better? And I was really lucky that the HR person who was taking me to the interview, just before I went in, she goes, be honest, tell them what you could have done better. So I was like, okay, very good tip. Thanks. So when she asked me that question, I said, you know what, I think it could have been better if I did X, Y, Z. And I'm really keen on improving. So I could have done X, Y, Z in like if I had another chance, basically. And I think, and I have no idea because they don't give you like any feedback after, but I think that's the only reason I was accepted at Accenture. I got a call probably like 2 days later and they were like, congrats, you got a place. So that's probably the peak. And my penultimate slide is, just talking about Accenture. I'm going to give you a bit of a summary. I think there's Q&A at the end, so you can probably ask me further. What is management consulting? Every single firm you go to does management consulting in a different way. Like it's all very similar, but everyone does their own. Some people do it based on sector, so like health and public services, retail, whatever it is. Some people do it based on let's say capabilities. So if you want to go into like transformation of organizations, or if you're more interested in digital, or if you're interested in like the HR side of things, there's different areas that you can go into. I personally focused on health and public services. I'm all about doing consulting for good. That is my key thing. That's a bit of I'm on that hype of trying to be as ethical as possible and doing good as much as I can. So that's what I did with Accenture. I'm not going to mention my clients because of privacy, but I did end up working for a health client, customs and revenue client. You guys can guess who these are, and a police client. So I had that wide range of experience. And the good thing in consulting, is probably my favorite thing, is that you can dip into loads of things. You don't need to know what you want to do. You can try out a lot. And I think depending on the company, they give you opportunities to do that. I can't obviously speak for every company, but Accenture gave me that opportunity in my first year. They give you different projects. You can network, the typical word, find out what other people are doing and see how you can, contribute and join their projects. So finally, and sorry, this is the deadest slide, even though it's probably the most important, maybe, tips to success. Trust the journey. I said this at the beginning. Trust that it's going to go up, it's going to go down. You have to accept that. When I was recently applying for jobs as well, it took me like a good month or two to actually get another job. Obviously COVID and Christmas had an impact, and I could have been demotivated, but I didn't. I just kept going. And I know a lot of people probably they get demotivated when they don't get these offers, but don't worry, trust the journey. You'll get there somehow. Secondly, get involved. Be a yes man / woman. Just say yes to everything when you're at university. Just do as much as you can. Honestly, you're not going to get that opportunity again. It's definitely, it's one of my biggest regrets. Even though I did so much at university, I wish I could even go back and do even more. Not only for your career, but just because like it's an experience. So just go for it. And finally, be prepared, be confident, and be yourself. Those are the three things you need to remember when you go to any interview. Be prepared, know what the company does, don't do my IBM mistake. Be confident. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for someone, who has these skills and they can confidently say, this is what I've done, X, Y, Z. And be yourself. As I mentioned, I was up against Oxbridge applicants. I'm not saying Oxbridge is bad or anything. I don't have any hatred against them, but these guys were like trying to be fake to get through to the interview, and it was clear. I actually got told by one of the HR people, you know what, these guys are faking it, and it's clear. Don't be fake, just be yourself. Be as passionate as you can be when it comes to your career. I know sometimes it's draining and you're fed up, but yeah, it's important to be yourself. And I take that through till now with my current job. Currently working for a startup, left Accenture for various reasons, but consulting is really good, and I would recommend.
Thanks, Layla. Really enjoyed your conversation there. Just a couple of things that really stuck out to me. Firstly, I noticed that on a lot of the polls, we have quite a lot of students who are in their first or second year. So trying to resonate some of the points that Layla mentioned specifically in terms of like try to distinguish yourself as a student. So don't just focus on your studies, but like she mentioned how try to get involved in societies, try to get in internships as well. But something that I did, I had a part-time job at university as well. So I used to work in retail, I used to work at TK Maxx. But even by a variety of things as well, I used to play football. I used to play a university football team. So try to kind of do loads of different things. You kind of add variety and diversity to your CV just so you could stand out. And secondly, specifically for the second year students, myself and also Ahmed secured an internship at KPMG. I secured a placement year at PwC. That was a massive benefit in the sense that we could go to our final year of university, don't need to worry about any jobs, any applications, because we were granted a conditional job offer, assuming we got 2-1 or above, and we could just focus on our exams. So just a kind of like massive de-stress. Would highly recommend it to the second and first year students if they could secure any internship placements. Obviously, if you don't, it's not the end of the world. You could obviously still the graduate cycle to go through. But appreciate that, Layla. I really enjoyed your slides and presentation there. Moving on to our next speaker, we have Mohammed. So just to kind of a bit of a background on him, he joined EY as a graduate in audit. And then once he qualified with the ACA qualification, sorry, I think it's with EY, it's the ICAS. He then moved into business consulting. Just to give you a bit of an idea, this is quite a common route a lot of people take. A lot of people join these firms in audit, and then once they qualify, they go into different streams, either into consultancy or tax, or actually going into industry. But Mohammed made the choice of moving into consultancy. So without further ado, I'll hand you all over to Mohammed.
Hi everyone, I'm Mohammed Amanji. I work at EY. I'm a manager in business consulting. I probably won't do as much of an in-depth sort of overview as to sort of the journey from university and all my experiences. I'll probably touch on more as to the practical side of management consulting and sort of my experiences and sort of my, the tips and advice I'd probably give to graduates. I'm sort of experienced in my career now. I'd like to think I'm a bit of a veteran now, being at EY since 2012. So I also take part in sort of the interview process at EY for people who apply in my service line. So I can give you some sort of key tips and sort of how I interview and what I look out for in applicants. So my career, as Ibrahim said, started in audit. One of the things that Ibrahim just touched on there is about trying to secure placements before you actually finish university. So I actually did an internship between my second year and third year in audit. Okay, it was in Hull. I don't know if we have any people here from Hull, not the most glamorous of places, but I managed to secure an internship there. And then when they offered me a grad job, I asked for a transfer to Manchester, which they did for me. It takes that pressure off going into the final year. Ibrahim said you go into the final year knowing you've got a conditional offer for a job before you go into it. Another thing Layla mentioned as well, a lot of firms allow you to defer as well. So for example, I did an internship between my second year and third year. They would have offered me a role for when I finished university, but I could have deferred it for another 12 months. So therefore, if I want counseling, etc. So there's a lot of flexibility that firms provide, which is you control your own destiny and how you want to shape your career. Business consulting, like I said, I moved from external audit into business consulting, and the part of business consulting I work in is called risk-based consulting, and what we principally look at is how businesses are set up from a risk perspective. What are the key risks that are impacting in clients, and therefore what should they processes, controls should they put in place to help them mitigate risk exposure. It was the reason why I moved from external audit into this one. Is there's an element of this job that I do is also to do with assurance and providing clients with the confidence that where the risk is, we've got the right level of process controls and rigor to protect the business, and sort of we report up to the board of directors, audit committee chairs, etc. So there was a nice transition from external audit, which is basically looking at financial statements and providing assurance over financial statements, to more providing consultancy work where you're giving senior management, boards of directors, the comfort and the assurance that their business is running how it should be run, and sort of making sure they're not as impacted with other things. So we look at everything but financial statements, if that makes sense. So your external audit team will look at all your financial statement related risk. In business consulting and risk, you look at everything else. Also in business consult, I was saying this to the guys, the GradGuru guys, about my service line of consulting. I'll also speak broader about consulting at EY. And the point there is what is the nature of work. So I'll give you an example of how consulting works at EY. So a lot of this information is on EY's website, and when you go through the applications or selecting which consulting graduate role you want to apply for, there will be sort of in-depth information as to what that specific service line consulting do. So we have, for example, tech consulting, business consulting, which I'm in, strategic consulting, finance consulting, cyber consulting. So there's a wide stream of consulting opportunities at EY. And the thing is, you might not know which specialism of consulting you want to go into. There's two graduate, if I split the two graduate schemes at EY up into two, there's one graduate scheme where you'll join as an ACP, and therefore you'll get 2 years of just broad consulting experience, where after the 2 years you'll then select a specialism. So so in them 2 years you'll have worked on a variety of clients, and then you can say, actually I really like supply chain, so I want to become a specialist in supply chain consulting, or I like finance, so I want to be a finance consultant, etc. In risk consulting, we operate slightly differently, because a lot of the stuff we do is still there is a bit of an accounting focus. So you'll join a different type of grad scheme where you'll be doing the ACA qualification. So you'll join EY, you'll get your chartered accountancy qualification. So that's if you apply for business consulting at EY, and the two specific lines are enterprise risk and technology risk. So if you apply for a risk-based consulting role, you'll get a chartered accountancy qualification out of it. In terms of the nature of work, so in consulting, you probably, especially in the Big Four and any professional services firm, you are working on very large scale projects. A lot of the clients who recruit and hire EY's expertise, these are multi-million-pound projects. So, you know, sometimes they could be in infrastructure, in transport, you know, they're in energy and utilities. So you'll be working on large programs, and the type of work he's doing is looking at, for example, how a business is set up. They'll come to EY with a problem, and therefore what EY's role is to understand the problem, provide our expertise and specialism, help them navigate how they want to. We will help them come up with recommendations and a roadmap how to either adopt new technology, look at the people structure, look at the way they're operating, what can they do to improve what is that issue they've come up with, and that they're struggling to sort of remediate internally. So that's what happens there. Like I said, it's large scale organizations that we work with primarily. What would a grad be doing? So a role as a graduate, you'll be working with these clients. Obviously, there'll be people in the team. You work as a team, so you won't ever be working in isolation on a client. You'll be working as part of a larger team. The team will have different levels. You'll have managers, senior managers, directors, partners on there, who firstly have a lot more experience than you, have a lot more knowledge and etc. So therefore, you're not expected to know what is the answer for the client, but you're going to help to build the information, do the research, build the evidence. How are we going to get the client to think like us, to buy into what we're telling them? And that's what you'll be doing. So as a grad, you might be expected to do a lot of the background research. You might be expected to do prepare a lot of the documents, prepare a lot of the presentations, etc. So that's principally what you probably do. I can see Abraz give one of the example clients I work with. So it's a Premier League football club. I won't go into who it is, but the work we do is around, they came to EY with issues, for example, around their ticketing process. How does a fan buy a ticket? How do they pay for a ticket? How do we refund tickets? How do we deal with complaints around tickets? So as EY, we reviewed the whole end-to-end process and said, look, this is how, your process around giving complimentary tickets, or your process around giving disabled fans tickets, because the disabled fan will need probably a sort of personal assistant to help with a wheelchair, etc. So we looked at the whole end-to-end process. Do you want to move away from giving people paper tickets to get e-ticketing, so it comes on an app on your phone? How do you want to encourage your supporters to pay for tickets? So we want, the less number of tickets that are paid by cash is beneficial for the client, because cash, there's always risk around cash going missing, etc. You'd rather be people paying by card and debit card or paying online. That's the most secure payment method. So you work with the client to help them think outside the box and sort of how can they improve. So that's a quick sort of summary of what we do in consulting. Actually, two actual practical points to give you an impression on is there is travel involved. A lot of our clients are based either in London or the Midlands, etc. And you won't maybe have your client might not be near to where your office is, so you probably have to go to travel to the client. So what a lot of our consultants do, they go to the client Monday to Thursday, and they'll stay in a hotel, a hotel with a gym, and have evening dinners in there, and then they'll come back Thursday evening, and Friday they'll probably be in the office. So they, if you're a home person, or you prefer to be at home, or you have other commitments outside of work where you need to be at home, have a think about that. So from a practical perspective, obviously everything's changed right now in terms of the COVID world. I'm talking pre-COVID, obviously, where everything's gone virtual. There's lots of remote working. We're doing things from home, but that is an element. So maybe think about that. And then the second bit is also around understanding, you're going to be working in large teams. A lot of our clients are highly pressurized, so it's not a 9-to-5 job. And probably, to be fair, this is applicable across any career you choose, where the hours could be long and just be expected that sometimes it might be 9 till 8, 9 till 7. Thankfully, in sort of risk consulting, we sort of try and create a sort of a good work-life balance, so we don't tend to work long hours. But I know there are elements of consulting where the hours is expected to be a lot longer because we've got short deadlines, highly pressurized. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. I'm trying to be as transparent as possible that it is a career that might involve A, travel, B, long hours. The final bit, and I'll probably try to keep it to a couple of minutes, is I do take part in sort of a lot of the final interviews. And I started touching on this, and there's no set template for who your final interviewer is. They might have their own style, personality, and what they look for, but this is just me giving you a bit of a steer as to my approach to final interviews. And it's probably 3 key tips to give you guys is preparation. Be prepared, research the role, research the firm you're working for. So if it's an EY, research EY. If it's PwC, research them. As Layla said in her example, research IPM. You got to come prepared. Also, like I've got there, be as natural as possible. Again, Layla touched on a couple of these points around those people who are just being fake. Be as natural as possible. I personally recruit on personality. It's about seeing if the person is motivated, if the person has an adaptable personality, if they want to develop, want to learn, have positive body language. I'm not saying we don't recruit introverts and we're looking for extroverts, but if you've got a good balance between being an introvert and extrovert, so it's all I think that you get a vibe. So a lot of the interviews I've been doing recently have actually been over Zoom. So it's about understanding, try and be enthusiastic, show lots of enthusiasm, show lots of positive, show lots of good body language. Because I look at more of, as Ibrahim's put in bullet point 3 there, is how you deliver as opposed to what you're saying. I'm not as interested in the technical elements of the interview as much. It's more about how you deliver it, how you demonstrate your thought processes, how motivated you are. Last top tips for consulting as well, when I was just writing a couple of things that you can probably work on whilst you're at is have strong written skills. Being able to write proficiently. Business writing is quite important. You might be expected to write reports, business articles, etc. So be proficient in writing. PowerPoint is probably a very important document that we use at the moment, although it's the bane of my life trying to get PowerPoint. So if you can get PowerPoint savvy and find any sort of quick tips on PowerPoint, that's always helpful. The final one is around EY and Big Four. Whilst we're not regarded as core management consulting firms, and you have obviously McKinsey, Boston Consulting, etc. At EY, you get a variety of experience. So a lot of the stuff that I do with the Premier League Football Club, I pull in, for example, people from tax, people from HR advisory, people from accounting, etc. Because you're not going to know everything as a consulting team as well. So you'll want to use specialists where possible, and therefore having the breadth in a firm of people that have things that you don't know, you can pull them in. And at the end of the end goal is, how do you provide your client with the best service, high quality service, value for money? At the end of the day, they're paying a lot of money to EY and these firms.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mohammed. Apologies for cutting you short there. Just conscious of time, but really enjoyed your talk there, your PowerPoint. Some very good practical tips to take there in terms of those going throughout the application process, especially the interviews. Something to note that a lot of these skill sets don't just think they're EY specific. These are some core competencies, core skills that you could apply to other jobs as well. As there was a lot of overlap with some of the things that Layla mentioned as well. So do keep that in mind. Right, as mentioned, I can see a couple of questions coming through the Q&A. On to the final aspect of this webinar. We have 3 things here. So we have the Q&A. So if you want to stay on the Q&A, that will be with Mohammed and Layla, and you can just ask them the questions. I can see there's already quite a few come through. Secondly, we are adopting a new approach in terms of having breakout rooms. So if you want to join one of these breakout rooms, the first one is looking at case study interviews / assessment centers, and that will be hosted by Mohammed Hafar. Lastly, the other breakout room we have is more of an informal, general discussion networking breakout room, and that will be hosted by Ali. So just to kind of reiterate, we have the Q&A, which will be with Mohammed and Layla. A breakout room 1 will be case studies assessment center with Mohammed Hafar, and a more informal ad hoc general discussion networking will be with Ali. If you want to stick with the Q&A, you need to stay on this call, don't drop off. Whereas if you want to join either one of these breakouts, then you need to firstly leave this call. So if I take your attention to the right side of the screen, you need to leave this call and then join a separate Zoom call, which the login details are on the left. So on the left for Mohammed Hafaz, you have the Zoom and the password there. And likewise, if you want to join the one with Ali, you have the Zoom ID and along with the same password there. So we're just going to give a couple of minutes just for people to kind of decide where they want to go into, either the Q&A, either join the breakout rooms, and which specific breakout room you want to join. I'm just going to monitor the chat in the same time as well. So we've just posted the links in the chat for breakout room 1 and breakout room 2. You don't need to stay there for the full duration. In terms of how long the remainder of this call will last, we'll probably be here till 2:15, 2:20. So split your time accordingly, however you want. But I'm going to give you a couple of more seconds and then we're going to start with the Q&A with Mohammed and Layla. In the meantime, if I could request Layla to put her video and unmute herself. And similarly, if I could also invite Ahmed to the Q&A as well. So we've got a handful of questions. The first one I'm going to start off is a question to you, Layla, and it's coming from Brit. What are the required skill sets for management consulting?
Okay, so in terms of the key one that shouts to my mind is the ability to problem solve. That's something, you need to figure out how to do, especially with case studies. You'll be presented with a problem and you need to solve it. But apart from that, you've got teamwork, you've got communication skills. With anything, it's always the similar competencies. But yeah, I would definitely say, problem solving and then communicating it in a way that's clear and concise is really, really important.
I think to add to that, there's also an aspect of I know it's not a skill, but ask the right questions and ask lots of questions, because that's how you'll get the information you need to then solve the problem, as Layla says. So asking questions and asking the right, don't be hesitant. It's not what I say to my grads, no question is the wrong question. So just ask away.
Cool. Just whilst we've got you, Mohammed, another question from Brit. You mentioned ACP when discussing broad consulting. What does ACP stand for?
Are you going to ask me that?
The world of abbreviations in
yeah. I'm going to have to give a pass. I'll see how quick Ibrar is on Google. But
I'll just ask one of my colleagues within the GradGurus team to look into that. But yeah, just moving on to you, Ahmed, just a question for you. Could you please explain the difference between internships and placements?
So an internship is a preparatory sort of 6 or 8 week or even 4 week work experience that you do. It's generally paid and you generally do it at the end of your second year. An industry placement is generally in your third year of university. So you've studied first year, you've studied your second year, and then your entire third year will be done in the firm. So it's like an entire year long placement. That's obviously going to give you a much sort of more broad level of experience. Now, both will end up hopefully with a job offer at the end of it for you to work once you've completed your degree. So from that perspective, they're both pretty similar. One is just a lot longer than the other. From my experience, if you are somebody who enjoys being a student and you sort of want to extend your university stay, and also you don't think that 6 weeks is enough to get the experience that you would want to have a look into these firms that you want, you probably want to go with the internship. The placement, I think, is more if you want to extend that stay. The issue would be that if you do a placement year and 3 or 4 weeks in you're not really too happy, with an internship you can just sort of finish it off, whereas with a placement you've got to continue with it. So I would say on the safe side, probably do an internship, and in terms of a placement, if you're aware of what you want to go into.
Cool, thanks for that. Just sticking with you again, Mohammed, I've got a bit of a different question from our usual group of questions, but I'm just going to read out this question. I am 28 years old, currently studying a master's in management and looking to have a career change into management consultancy. I was working in apparel design and product development before, and therefore do not have previous experience in terms of internships or placements. I'm struggling to find a graduate program. Have you ever encountered any hire which has a career changing background like me?
One of the graduates that recently came onto the scheme, he was 29 actually, so he was a lot older, a mature gentleman that joined the team. There is no discrimination at EY with regards to when you apply for a graduate scheme and sort of your background, so long as you can apply sort of the skills you've learned, you know, over these last couple of years in your career, and how you want to transfer them into sort of a career in consulting. That wouldn't be a problem.
Cool, thanks for that, Mohammed. Moving on to you, Leila. What a question coming here from Laura. What will your advice to demonstrate work experience done internationally? I feel when I mention my work experience internationally, it does not have the same impact as opposed to someone doing an internship at EY, for example.
Actually, you know what? I have experience applying internationally. I applied to the Middle East, like PwC in the Middle East. To be honest, you just have to kind of look around, Google, see what the interview process is like for PwC in the Middle East. Use or wherever international is. I guess I don't know whether this question actually, Abrar, you might be able to clarify. Is it to apply internationally or how international experience applies here?
Yeah, so the question is not, she's not looking to apply, or him, he's not looking to apply to any international jobs. The question is, how do I demonstrate my international experience? Like, for example, you went to China in an interview scenario, because sometimes she feels when other candidates do internship at EY or other experiences, that seems to be more powerful as opposed to her international experience.
So with international experience, okay, it's a bit of a tough one, because on your CV, it's a really, really like difficult one to demonstrate from the get-go. Once you get into the interview, I actually find it quite easy. Traveling and, you know, international experiences proves a lot. I think the number one thing is resilience. Everyone used to love that when it came into interviews. They just love the idea of resilience, problem solving. That's key. Just basically try and find the competencies within your international experience. I don't know whether, you know, you're specifically doing like international internships, for example, so maybe with companies that aren't as well known, or for example with me, like I taught English in a school in China, like that's not even related. But like I said, you know, you find out what the competencies are that you need for these interviews, and then literally write down the competency, write down how that experience links to that competency, and that's the best way of doing it in an interview.
Whatever experience you have, be it international, be it here, just think about, you know, break it down. What was the experience? What did you do? How did it benefit someone else, etc., and sort of see how you can apply it in any scenario. I don't think there's a again, like I said, it's not discrimination against the fact that you gained your experience internationally, but it's a case of how can you break it down into what were the key bits of what you did.
Yeah, and just a very quick addition to that, which is before I applied to my internship, I'd done no real experience. I completely focused on my academics, which, to be fair, were reasonably good. And I still managed to secure an internship. Once I did secure the internship, it was very easy to then mention that internship going forward. So really, experience is better than having no experience. You know, if you've got the experience, use it to your benefit and make sure that you follow the points that Leila and Mohammed have noted.
Yeah, and it's not just experiences you've got in paid work. You know, for example, one of the girls I interviewed recently was part of she's part of the GB sailing team, for example, and she was just applying, you know, explaining to me how she prepares for races, does races, looks at, you know, where she can improve races after races, etc. So it gave me, you know, an impression of, you know, while she's not got paid work experience, she's giving a practical example of something she does outside in a sort of personal life, and sort of how that improves her and gives her a foundation skill set. Similarly, another recent interview was whilst they were at university, she got involved with just some sort of mentoring and other sort of social consulting at university, and sort of how that applied. You know, there's no right answer to this, guys. It's about building, you know, as Leila says, building a pool of experiences that you can then talk about, is how I summarize it.
Moving back to you, Ahmed, just a question. So we have a student in their final year, and they were unable to secure any internships or placements, and they want to go down the route of consulting. So what would you suggest? The question is, sorry, what route do you suggest I take in order to pursue consulting after I graduate?
So ideally speaking, you obviously want to do an internship. If you don't do an internship, you want to apply for graduate jobs. The reason you apply for graduate jobs in your third year is not because you know, firms are looking for people who are in their third, you know, or particularly looking for people, for graduates who are in their third year. You just want to have a job lined up after you graduate. So Mohammed Hafar, who spoke in our last event, graduated and didn't, you know, and looked for jobs, you know, several months after he graduated, and still ended up finding a job at Accenture. So, you know, maybe you could have applied earlier, but you're in the position that you're in. You need to apply as you would have applied. The main thing is that you've got a 2-1 in your degree, or a 2-2, or that kind of grade. Yeah. The one thing I would say is you can become a little bit demotivated, maybe slightly lazy, because you don't have that structure that you had at university. You can sort of very quickly get into a lifestyle applying for jobs, and so if you pretend as if you are in a job, see the application process as almost a job in and of itself, wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning, apply till, you know, 4 or 5 o'clock, you'll find yourself very quickly getting a job. If you think, I want to have a 2 to 3 month break, I finish my university studies, and, you know, I'm going to apply here and there and not really putting a lot of effort, you're going to struggle. So I think that's be the key. That there's no real difference applying in your third year versus applying 2 years after you've graduated. I mean, just to very quickly add to what Mohammed said before, working at KPMG, I came across probably 50% of graduates who joined on my intake were above the age of 30. Now, a lot of them had done jobs beforehand. It's not as if they'd never done jobs before, but really there's no time frame for applying. It's just, ideally speaking, you know, you want to get on that corporate ladder as quickly as you can, so that by the age of 30, 35, you know, you're in the manager, senior manager. But otherwise, there's no real time frame.
Thanks for that, Ahmed. Leila, to you, I'm going to ask you the most liked question, which is liked by one other person. Is it true the average number of working hours in consultancy management jobs is about 60 to 70 hours per week? A bit contentious, but
I had a feeling I would be asked that question. I was just thinking about it. Basically, I don't know, yeah, if you remember, I mentioned that I work in the health and public services sector. I chose that specifically. Most of my clients were, in government public service. So their hours weren't long at all, which means that my hours weren't that long either. I pretty much worked 9 till 6, 9 till 7, that kind of thing, maximum. Did that strategically. If you work in finance, then you're going to be doing finance hours. Might be a different story at EY though, Mohammed. So you can shed some light on that.
It is. You know, I did touch on it during my little brief presentation. It's not just a, you know, an office job based 9 to 5. You know, just be prepared. You know, Leila's strategically managed to position herself in a part where, you know, the hours may not have been that long. It's likewise with myself. I'm in risk consulting. The team I'm with and the sort of culture that's within the team. You know, I'm not talking about UI as a whole, but the team I work in are very much around work-life balance. A lot of my sort of directors I work to are very, you know, have young kids, so therefore they're quite strict with their time, sort of post-work. You know, they do drop-offs, pickups, etc. So, you know, that just be open-minded to it, but also, you know, Leila and I are just sharing our experience and what we can give you, but as in that there's no set answers for that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just very, very quickly too. I mean, I know it's not in consulting necessarily, but you know, within consulting you'll have several branches, like within audit, tax, within any department you'll have several branches. So as Mohammed said, within each of those particular departments, you know, you'll have particular culture around hours, and then you'll have particular clients. So just very briefly from my experience, for example, we audited a FTSE 100 client. I was working, you know, sort of 2, 3 in the morning. I don't even know what that would calculate over a week. And then, you know, before I left, or you know, now that I'm going to be leaving KPMG soon, they decided to place me on sort of one of our less risky or what would be called like easier clients, where, I mean, I barely find enough to do between 9 to 5. So the way you should see it is, I'm going to work 70-hour weeks some parts of the year, other parts of the year I'm going to be working 20, 30-hour weeks, and it sort of balances out. I mean, this is not investment banking where, you know, you just do 80-hour weeks January to December and you've lost your hair by the time you're 25, similar to Ibra. And you know, so that, I would say don't get too put off by the level of hours. It does balance out by the end of the year.
Leila, coming to you in relation to psychometric testing, because you touched on it in your slideshow. A two-part question. Firstly, how do I prepare for psychometric testing? Secondly, what specific type of psychometric tests or skills are involved? Is it time calculations, probability, ratio, statistics, that kind of thing?
Depending on the company, depends on the test. What they usually do is they give you practice questions, so you'll be able to see what the test is going to be like. I actually specifically remember EY's one being quite situational, and that was like, you are in this situation, how would you deal with this situation? You can literally just Google practice psychometric testing consulting UK, and then you'll get your answer. Should you pay for them? I never did, but then again, I never passed any psychometric tests, so maybe that's where I went wrong. I think actually, I don't remember if Accenture had one. Maybe they did, but it was a really small test. But yeah, some are just numbers, some are verbal, some are situational. Depends.
Just to add on to that, 2 points. Firstly, me and my friends at university, we bought I think a package, and we just split it across 4 or 5 of us. So then it worked out quite cheaply. I think it was called assessmentdaycenter.co.uk, something like that. But secondly, just to shamefully plug in a GradGurus event, we are looking to do a demystifying psychometric test in the coming weeks. So hopefully keep your eyes peeled out to that, and we'll give you the A to Z of psychometric testing. A question for you, Mohammed, is quite specific, but it's again coming from Bahrat. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. But what kind of CV and skills to put in front of a management consultancy firm for any candidate having experience in manufacturing industry and education in engineering?
Depending on the role you're applying for, tailor your CV accordingly. So if you're applying for supply chain consulting, so therefore having a manufacturing background, and sort of how you've dealt with your suppliers, how you've understood supply chain process, how you've influence change on find ways of making efficiencies, etc. in your manufacturing process, and how that can be applicable to supply chain is what I do. So where you could construct your CV, I'd put the more relevant previous jobs experiences further to the top, so therefore, because people lose focus as they're reading it, so you want the more key experiences to be at the top, and then also then what you did in that role and what pertinent points that are effective part of what you're applying for, if that makes sense. That's what I would suggest.
Thanks for that. Leila, coming back to you in relation to Spring Weeks. So one of the questions is, I haven't applied for any investment banking Spring Weeks as I'm not interested in it. I'm more interested in consultancy, so we'll apply for the Spring Weeks in consultancy. Does it matter? Most people I've spoken to have advised to apply for the IB Spring Weeks.
Look, if you get a consulting Spring Week, then that's good. But you kind of want to widen your options out. It's better to have a Spring Week than not have anything. Then again, if like specifically the investment banking, you're going to have a really bad time if you're not enjoying it. Spring Weeks are okay because they're only 3 days, but with a summer internship, watch out, because you'll be staying up till like 2 o'clock in the morning every day that summer. So maybe don't. But with a Spring Week, any experience is better than no experience. So what I would say is just apply and then make your decision once you've got whatever your options are. Even if it's not investment banking, like try anything, just get some sort of experience.
Thanks. Ahmed, just a question for you. What are the pros and cons of doing an apprenticeship at a management consultancy firm as opposed to doing the traditional route of going to university and then getting a grad role?
The advantage, the primary advantage is avoiding going to university. So you go to university in order to get a job. I think unless you are a idealist, you're not going for the education. I'll just speak for myself, probably the panelists who are speaking. If you could get a job without going to university, you probably wouldn't go, even if the fees weren't so high. So then the question then becomes, I can save £27,000, I can be paid rather than not be paid. Well, why wouldn't I do an apprenticeship? So the main issue is at the age of 18, you are not necessarily primed in terms of your level of maturity, in terms of, mentally, psychologically, emotionally. Are you primed to go into a job where it's been discussed that you're going to be working 60 to 70 hour weeks? My experience working with apprentices in KPMG, and it's specific toward it, but I'm sure it would work across all different disciplines, is that some of the people who join at 18 have a surprising level of maturity where becoming an apprentice and working in that environment is an excellent idea. I'll talk about myself. I probably wasn't ready at that age, which is why I went to university. So it becomes a personal choice. You need to give yourself a long, hard look in the mirror and think, am I really ready at the age of 18 to go into the world of work where I'm going to be for the next 30, 40 years? mean, there's no rush really. I mean, we've already spoken about people who join the world of work at the age of 30. If so, you are willing, you are ready to an apprenticeship and you're going to save a lot of fees at university. At the same time, if you don't feel like you're in that position, and I would probably say that's more than 50% of people, maybe 60 to 70% of people are not ready to go into the world of work. You know, £27,000 is a lot of money. If you, at the same time, that will give you that level of maturity, that age, you know, 3 years extra, and then you'll end up getting a job at 21, 22, and you'll be in the same position, you know, and you're not going to be too far behind the apprentices. So I think it's a personal decision, you know, probably speaking majority. I mean, maybe the people attending this sort of a lecture will maybe have that high level of maturity if you're already on the job hunt. So maybe that's a good decision to go for an apprenticeship. But I would take and I would speak to as many people as you can and say, you know, knowing me, your family, your friends, am I ready to go into a job where it's not going to be 9 to 5? And then I would make the decision from there.
Thanks for the answer. Just the last question we've got coming in. Again, Mohammed, to use a bit specific. But question coming in from, apologies if I mispronounce this name, but Prakar. I come from a civil engineering / construction management background. Which field of management consulting would be most relevant to my experience?
Good point. I've got 2 people in my team who've both done, one's done civil engineering and one's done chemical engineering, and one's done civil engineering. So, you know, and we do risk consulting. So as long as, you know, you're a problem solver, you think outside the box, you think in a certain way, that could be applied in any of the consulting roles. You know, what is, you know, I don't know if we were defined consulting at the start, but if there is a definition, it's about taking a problem, taking an issue, breaking it down, understanding how can you add value, how can you improve it. So, you know, you coming from that sort of background will set you up with working in each of the fields, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. So that was the last question, and I'm going to conclude today's session today now. But before I do, I just want to reach out and say thank you to our panelist speakers, Mohammed, Amanji, and Leila. I really enjoyed your slideshows and your conversations. Hopefully, it was a massive benefit to our attendees. And likewise, thanks to Ahmed for joining the Q&A. Lastly, as mentioned, this was kind of an insight into management consulting, a bit of insight to who GradGurus are. I'm just going to direct your attention towards the bottom of the slides. We have various different platforms which you could get in contact with us, be that social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or go on our direct website at www.gradgurus.co.uk. Alternatively, if you just want to send us a WhatsApp message, we can speak to you like that and really help you with your mentorship, with your application process, or just have a general chat about your career and long-term aspirations. But really appreciate everyone's time here, and hopefully see you again on the next event. Thanks, everyone.